Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in the Spiritist Talk series, promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation, which occurs every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Eastern Daylight Time. I am again delighted to host this talk by our dear guest, Marcelo Netto, who will be presenting a familiar and important piece in our lives, the Lord's Prayer. Before proceeding with today's talk, I would like to take a moment to remind everyone to please send in your questions and comments for this morning's presentation using the chat window. Marcelo has reserved time to address your comments and questions once he concludes his presentation today. Now, we're looking forward to an engaging time with our speaker, Marcelo Netto, who holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. He is currently the president of the Spiritist Federation of Florida, the president of Leal and FEB, publisher, and the vice president of Conscious Living Spiritist Group in Florida. This morning, Marcelo will speak to the theme of the Lord's Prayer. We all claim to wish for world peace, but are we truly inclined to contribute towards it? If we are, do we know the difference between the peace of the world and that of Christ? In this study, we hope to offer a reflection about this, for peace starts within. Please give a warm welcome to our dear brother, Marcelo.
Thank you very much, Bradley, for this warm, uh, uh, warm moment that when we initiate our talk about this subject. I think this is a very important subject because we most often we make confusions about what is the difference of the peace that I wish to have in the world and the peace that Christ was talking to us over 2,000 years ago. But let's imagine a scenario. It's just an imagination. The scribes and Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery and made her stand right there in their midst. They said to the Lord, Master, this woman was caught into the act of adultery. In the law of Moses, in the law, Moses has commanded us that such woman should be stoned. What do you say? The scene is very dramatic. It's something that we can imagine, something like that. We already saw this in too many movies. The law of Moses made from more than 1,000 years earlier is very harsh, is punitive, and includes capital punishment, very different from the law proposed by Jesus, based entirely on education and full of compassion. While the Mosaic law meant to discipline humanity, displaying primitive customs, prescribed stoning the woman, the great caregiver proposed eradicating the fault, eradicating the wrong. But let's try to pause for a second and consider this. This is one of the greatest lessons that promote peaceful actions. If I were to ask you, you that watching me now, right now, what do you think it's the meaning of peace? But let's think the opposite. What is the opposite of peace? Some of you may be inclined to think about war, rage conflicts, And usually, when we think of war, we automatically presume it's something on a much greater scale. We see Russia and Ukraine nowadays, for example, but there are too many wars happening out there. The truth is that war can start between only two people. And of course, can escalate to three, can escalate to four, until we see many vibrating in the same way. In the middle of a concentration camp, a warlike scenario. You already heard about this man in too many lectures. Viktor Frankl saw peace by search for meaning of his life. Paul of Tarsus ended his personal battle against Christianity on the road to Damascus by asking the Savior himself, "What do you want me to do, Lord?" In this pandemic moment that we are still in, maybe fading out, we find ourselves, and one can consider we are at war against all that is incompatible with the new world we are seeking to inherit. Jolted back to the reality of the immortal soul, we are being invited to consider, what is the peace we so much seek? We are all being invited to observe the aspect of developing peace, as Bradley very well said, within, within. The four walls of our homes could be considered that public square of 2,000 years ago. No others are pointing the fingers at us. Christ is not before us, and neither are the scribes and Pharisees. It is me alone, it is you alone, me alone with myself. But let's go back to that public square. Again, 2,000 years ago, Jesus bent down and wrote on the ground with his finger. What did he write? We don't know, but we could speculate. When someone errs, it is time to be quiet, to keep our thoughts to ourselves. Jesus said nothing at that specific moment, but instead, as I mentioned, he bends down, suggesting introspection, suggesting self assessment. His finger does not point at anyone in accusation, he points to the planet. He points to our home. And this leads us to realize that the error belongs to us who live on Mother Earth. Those who are presently partaking in the betterment, or maybe not, of a world in transition, and writing on the ground, he proposes a reflective way. It is the only time when we know that Jesus wrote something. We can do a free imagination exercise about what he wrote on the ground. Perhaps, and this is just perhaps, of course, perhaps a tender invitation was written in characters of light for the group that pressed him, indicating their hatred. Perhaps he wrote it just in imagination, meekness, indulgence, mercy. Perhaps he wrote tolerance, forgiveness, a call to the light comprising us. He cheers up our inactive good side. He awakens our luminous essence. But since they continue to question him, and then he stood up and replied, "Let him among you who is without sin cast the stone at her. Be the one, whoever is without sin, to cast the first stone. Jesus knew that the emotional content of his accusers was filled with guilt, which in defense they projected onto the woman, the depository of the pain of each one of them. The persistence of her judges showed how inwardly disturbed they were, because what moves, bothers, and hurts us the most often speaks of the pain overflowing from within our souls. One cannot be at peace like that. What I am doing, this is a question that I'm asking myself every day. And I think you should all ask this question. What am I doing to promote peace? I remember on the Gospel of Matthew, on chapter 5, when Jesus mentioned the Beatitudes, when he says, in front of this multitude of people, thirsty, hungry, anxious to see and to hear something different, and that voice that came from straight from the heart of that man said in very out loud sound that anyone, everyone could hear. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Some of you may be thinking, why should we not judge? Why should we not argue or bring up a discussion related to all the things I disagree with? Why should I put my head down and not instigate others to think, others to feel and do as I do? Why should I not seek vengeance? We see too many advertisers. Uh, I am in Orlando right now, and sometimes we see billboards. You know, when something bad happened, I will never forget. I was wondering what is behind this phrase, I will never forget. It means we are seeking vengeance. We are like far away, even though we declare ourselves Christians, we are far away from His commandments. Because, my friends, the most significant and most severe court system is our own conscience. Why we are busy pointing fingers, judging, and creating a movement that steers intolerance, antagonism, hatred, rivalry within and outside. We are wasting valuable time working on the betterment of the self. There's one question on the Spirit's book that I guess most of you know by heart. It's question number 621. When Allan Kardec asked to the good spirits, where is God's law written? I could like maybe compliment, well, bring something else in this question. Is it in the book? Is it in the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Spirit's book? Where's this law? The God's law is written in the Spirit's answer to Kardec. This law is written in our conscience. In our conscience. This is perhaps what led St. Augustine to leave us the recipe for developing a peace-filled life. When he wrote, Allan Kardec wrote the question 919, asking the benevolent spirits on the Spirit's book, what are the most effective means for improving ourselves in this life and for resisting the draw of evil. St. Augustine, the Spirit wrote, a sage of antiquity has told you, know thyself. Do we know ourselves? Do we really know ourselves? I guess not. But Kardec is super, very intelligent, and he's like bringing more questions. Says like on question 919a, he says like, okay, we comprehend all the wisdom of that maxim, but the difficulty is precisely in knowing ourselves. But what means can we do so? In St. Augustine, bring the answer that I'm going to read so I cannot lose a word. Oh, just a moment. This is the book. It fell over here. It's the charger for the computer. He brings the question that the answer that I'm going to read. It's right over here. Do what I used to do when I was living on earth. At the end of each day, I examined my conscience, reviewed what I had done, and asked myself whether or not I had failed to fulfill some duty, and whether or not anyone might have had reason to complain about me. Thus, I arrived at knowing myself and seeing what was in me that needed to be reformed. Those who would recall all their actions during the day, every night, and ask themselves what good or wrong they have done, praying to God and their guardian angel to enlighten them, would acquire great strength for self improvement because, believe me, God will assist them. Therefore, ask yourselves about what you have done and toward what aim you act in a particular circumstance, whether you have done anything you would blame others, and whether you have done anything you would not dare profess. Also ask if it pleased God to call me at this moment to enter the world of spirits where nothing is hidden. Would I cower before anyone gaze? Examine what you may have done against God, then against your neighbor, and lastly, against yourself. Here's the answer of St. Augustine. The answers will be either repose for your conscience or indicate a wrong that you must amend. There's another passage on the Gospel of Matthew on chapter 5, verse 25 to 26, but we can also find in the Gospel according to Spiritism on chapter 10, blessed are the merciful. But specifically on this portion of the Gospel, of the Gospel of Matthew on chapter 5, he brings us also something that I'm going to read. Be reconciled as quickly as possible with your adversary while you are with him on the way, so that he does not hand you over to the judge, and so that the judge does not hand you over to the minister of justice, so that you may not be imprisoned. Verily I tell you that you will not leave there as long as you have not paid the last cent. This is on the Matthew chapter 5, verse 25 to 26. Is Jesus warning to those who wish to live in peace? I think the sentence is clear. It's very clear, but we have to pay attention, of course. There's another book that I also like to indicate to tell you guys. The book is already available on Amazon. The name of the book is Forgiveness as the Way and the Way to Forgiveness. It was written by a doctor that usually comes to our seminars here once a year here in Florida and some parts of United States. His name is Dr. Alberto Almeida. In this book, we will see he making a comment about this portion of the Gospel of Matthew, the reconciliation with our adversaries, and he brings a very profound reflection about that. He says, in the first movement, he says, like, reconcile yourself. Reconcile yourself. So, is the part that falls to us to the degree that we want to pursue the path of peace, of harmony, and even forgiveness. The path is individual. That's what he mentioned. It's individual. It's non-transferable. It is traveled whether our adversary is aware of it or not, agrees to it or not, is near or far away from us. It all depends solely on us. It is the work of self-reconciliation, self-love, and it sometimes takes a long time to build self-forgiveness, the generator of our inner peace. But he breaks this portion in the second movement. Reconcile yourself with your adversary. And he keeps explaining us on this wonderful book that this is when another person who we feel has offended us or whom we have offended enters the scene. The adversary may be a person, maybe our spouse, maybe our father, a mother, a son, other family members, a business partner, a neighbor, sometimes a country. We are enraged with our own country. This is the moment when our relationship with our adversary comes into play. That is a moment of contact with him, or with her, and often taking place in many different reincarnations. Sometimes it doesn't happen in only one lifetime. That is why it's so important for us to think that this process, it's sometimes taking as long as we need to one day find ourselves with this peace that Christ wishes us to all have. If both parties are amenable to an alliance in accord, then a journey of forgiveness. Let's remember the portion of the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5. While you are on the road with him, I mean, like in the same reincarnation, will take place until the ties of suffering are undone with the dissolution of hurt and the reestablishment of the bonds of harmony and peace. If the other part, the other protagonist, rejects the meeting, rejects this movement, however, and avoids contact because he or she is not yet receptive to this reconciliation process, then let us be the one whose conscience is at peace. Since after being reconciled with our own self, we dared to go to meet our brothers or sisters to effect forgiveness by seeking the fair solution to the offense. In doing so, the presence of the judge, our conscience, or the officer, when we see on this portion of the Gospel of Matthew, the officer means the good spirits will not be needed in the future, nor will imprison a new body, a new reincarnation for the settlement of disputes that had fallen by the wayside. That's why it's so important relationship that we develop between these four walls, something that we call home, something that we call family. That's why family is the most important school that God provides us to make amends. Sometimes the enemies from the past resides inside of our own homes in a form of a son, in a form of a daughter, in a form of a spouse, in a form of the ones that are living together with us. When we think about the question 775, when Allan Kardec asked the question, what would be the result for society if family ties were relaxed? A magnification of selfishness. This is what the spirits answer us. A magnification of selfishness. If we bring a portion of the book, uh, Jesus in the Home, psychographed by the medium Francisco Cândido Xavier, bringing us a portion of the spirit Neo Lucius dictate this message to Francisco Xavier, we will bring something interesting that I would like to read. World peace begins under the roof that shelter us. Let me read what Neo Lucio brought to Francisco Cândido Xavier. If we cannot learn to live in peace within four walls, how can nations expect to coexist in harmony? If we cannot love the brother or sister right next to us and who is involved with us in our daily struggle, how can we revere the eternal Father who seems so far away? This is something that we need to pay attention, because most of the time we want to save the world outside. We want to feed the hunger. We want to promote peace outside. But inside of our own homes, we cannot move a step forward in this movement of harmony, in this movement of asking for forgiveness. On this chapter of Blessed are the Merciful, on chapter 10, there's a portion that I would like to read saying, forgive so that God will forgive you. In Matthew chapter 5, blessed are the merciful, for they themselves shall receive mercy. In Matthew on chapter 6, keep saying, if you forgive others for the wrongs they have committed against you, your heavenly Father will forgive your sins also. But if you do not forgive others when they have offended you, your heavenly Father will not forgive your sins either. And we keep saying, we're going to find on item 3, if your brother has sinned against you, go to him and make his wrong known in private between you and him. If he listens to you, you will have gained a brother. Then Peter approached the master and said, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he has sinned against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered him, I do not tell you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times. 70 times, 7 times. And I highlighted here on the gospel something that we find on item 4 of the same chapter. Mercy is the complement of meekness, because whoever is not merciful cannot be meek and peaceable. Mercy consists in forgetting and forgiving offenses. Hatred and rancor denote a soul that is neither advanced nor great. Forgetting offenses, and when they say forgetting offenses, it doesn't mean like they were going to forget completely. This is amnesia. Forgetting offenses, the Gospel of Matthew and the good spirits I mean to, we give a different way on the offenses because it not affect us anymore how it used to affect us in the past. We see the offenses, we see the obstacles, we see everything that it's in front of us. It's simply a way for us to learn to go within, to dive within, and to digest that in a different way as a means to evolve, to grow, and to be someone that makes a difference in the world, promoting peace in a much different way. He says, like, let me read it again. Forgetting offenses is proper to the advanced soul, which is above the insults that might be directed at it. One is always anxious, darkly suspicious, and full of bile. The other is calm, full of gentleness and charity. And the spirits keep saying, actually, the Gospel of Matthew, woe to those who say, I will never forgive. Because if they are not condemned by other human beings, they certainly will be by God. It's not God, as the spirits are saying, as the Matthew was saying, is our own conscience. Let's remember that we're going to be imprisoned again in another incarnation so we can make amends and digest all the resentments, the rancor, whatever the sentiment that is still feeding us in rage, to transform, to transmute this in something else, in something more tender, something more subtle, something more appropriate for the life that we wish to have in the future. When Jesus says to forgive others not 7 times, but 70 times 7, he teaches us that mercy should have no limits. No limits. However, there are, I'm reading straight from the chapter 10 of the Gospel according to Spiritism. However, there are two quite different ways of forgiving. One is great, noble, truly generous, without ulterior motives, delicately sparing the self-esteem and susceptibility of one's opponent, even when he or she is completely to blame. And the second, by which the offended person or the one who thinks he or she has been offended imposes humiliating conditions on the other person and makes him or her feel the weight of forgiveness that angers instead of pacifies. If this person offers his or her hand, It is not done benevolently, but ostentatiously, in order to be able to tell the whole world, see how generous I am. In such circumstances, it is impossible for there to be a sincere reconciliation for either one. No, in this there is no generosity, but a way of satisfying pride. In every dispute, oops, in every dispute, oops, the one who shows that her or she is more conciliatory, who demonstrates more disintenderness, charity, and true greatness of soul will always win the sympathy of impartial individuals. I was reading this gospel. Maybe the reading was not very fantastic, if I can say, but this is more like an invitation for you guys to dive into this book, The Gospel According to Spiritism, especially in this chapter 10, Blessed are the Merciful. But if you go to the chapter 9, we will see, Blessed are the meek and the peace loving. This is we'll see, you will see a recipe how to conduct your life through this process of acquiring peace within. There's another portion on our daily bread on chapter 65. This book, psychographed by Chico Xavier, dictated again by the Spirit Emmanuel. On this chapter 65, they tell us, let us be at peace. And there's one letter that Paul sent to the Thessalonians, live in peace with one another. And the explanation given by the Spirit Emmanuel by this letter that Paul sent to the Thessalonians is, if it is impossible to live in a climate of perfect peace due to the ignorance and hostility that dominates the human pathway, it is logical for disciples to seek inner serenity when faced with the conflicts that seek to envelop them at every moment. Each incarnate mind is an extensive center of spiritual government, subordinate for the time being to appropriate limitations, while served by various abilities expressed in the senses and perceptions. Once all the individual power centers become self controlled and are geared toward the real good, then wars will be banished from the planet. To achieve this, however, those of humankind's brothers and sisters, let me read it again. To achieve this, however, those of humankind's brothers and sisters who are older and experienced and acknowledge and knowledge must learn to live in peace with one another, educating the sight, hearing, taste, and impulses represents the primordial foundation for constructive peacefulness. We usually hear, see, and feel according to our inclinations and not according to what is real. We interpret certain pieces of information according to our inner disharmony rather than the good intentions in which they were initially sent. We observe situations and events with the light or darkness that infuses our minds. We feel with the reflection or chaos we have instilled in our own understanding. And Emmanuel keeps saying, for this reason, serenity must envelop our steps as much as possible as we face the conflicts that surround us in our present circumstances. Without calmness, it is impossible to discern and to work for the good. Without peace, finished Emmanuel, inside of us, we will never reach the realms of true peace. That's why we are going to find on the Spirit's book, on the question 918, the characteristics of a moral person. When Kardec asked the spirits, by what signs can we recognize an individual in the individuals the real progress that will raise us into a different stage of life? He uses a different word. He maybe uses raise their spirit, our spirit within the spirit hierarchy. And the good spirits answer Kardec. The spirit proves its progress when all the actions of its corporeal life consist in practicing the law of God, and when it understands the spirit life beforehand. And then the same answer for this question we are going to find on the Gospel according to Spiritism on chapter 17, when he talks about the moral person. And this is a beautiful portion of the Gospel. And I like to finish lectures with this portion because this is our goal for the time being. Of course, we're going to have to achieve many lifetimes to be someone like that. But it's a process. But with a sincere will, a wish to develop this inner peace within, I'm sure we can take this step, this courageous step, not to win outside, but to win within, bringing something different for our lives, this tranquility, this inner peace that we so much seek outside. Let's change the paradigm. Let's dive within and bring this Christ inside of our hearts, because the truly moral individuals are those who practice the law of justice, the love, the law of love and charity in its most complete purity. And the Spirit keeps saying, if they interrogate their conscience concerning their actions, they will ask if they have not violated that law, if they have not committed any wrong, if they have done all the good that is within their power to do, if no one has a complaint against them, and lastly, if they have done to others what they would want others to do unto them. Those moral individuals possessing the sentiment of charity and love for their neighbor do good for its own sake without hope of reward, and they sacrifice their self-interest for justice sake. They are good, humane, and benevolent toward all because they see their own brothers and sisters in all humans, regardless of race or belief. If God has given them power and wealth, they regard it as a deposit that they must use for the good. But this does not make them vain, because they know that God, who has given them power and wealth, can also take them away. If the social order has placed persons under their care, they treat them with kindness and benevolence because they are equals before God. And the Spirit keeps saying, they use their authority to build them up morally and not to crush them with their pride. The Spirit can keep saying, they are tolerant of the weakness of others, for they know that they themselves need tolerance, and they remember the words of Christ, let him that is without sin cast the first stone. They're not vindictive, following Jesus' example. They forgive offenses and only remember benefits because they know that they will be forgiven as they have forgiven. Finally, they respect in others all the rights that the laws of nature have granted them, as they would desire their own to be respected. I wish to become one day someone with these characteristics. I read this portion of the gospel according to Spiritism so many times, and I sometimes on my talks, on my lectures, I I have this desire to repeat, to read it because I'm afraid to miss one portion, to read it over and over again, this beautiful portion. And I know that I'm far away from everything that I just read, but this is our goal. This is my goal. And I know that I'm going to find obstacles that still resides within, but I have faith that Almighty created has created us to overcome every single obstacle and to proportion something much greater for each and every one of us. That's why there's a big difference between the peace that the world desires and the peace that Christ proclaims. Let's be the one to proclaim this kind of peace, not only by words, very easy to say. Sometimes we memorize texts. Today, when I was preparing the material to talk about this lecture, I memorized too many things. I have like papers all over here. So I can, if I forget, maybe I'll cross my eyes and look and listen and hear and read it again, the passages. But I want to all these pages that are right in front of me, all these books that I have here, everything that I have learned, not only becomes something that I know intellectually, but something that it's becoming part of my true nature. And one day, who knows? I'm sure I am one day will be an instrument of Lord's peace. Thank you very much for the opportunity that we had today. And I'm open. It might be like a few questions so we can share something else. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcelo, for helping us to examine and reflect more deeply on seeking peace, but beginning within. At this moment, we open for comments and questions from our wonderful audience. From Andrea Marcelo Netto, my brother in law asks, is it really possible to live in a climate of perfect peace when there is so much ignorance and hostility around? Sometimes I doubt.
Thank you, Andrea. I knew she was going to say something like that. She's going to ask me something like that. My suggestion is don't be the promoter of ignorance, hostility. No. not be the promoter of discord. Let us be the opposite of what we see wrong in this world. If we are able to reflect our inner world, imagine how empowering it can be to truly be an active world changer if we are promoting peaceful acts. Let's remember the question 886 when the Kardec asked, "What is the true meaning of charity?" And the good spirits answer, benevolence towards everyone, indulgence towards our imperfections, and forgiveness for offenses. And to be the one who loves, to apply patience and indulgence towards others. Let's be the ones who loves first. The problem is that we pay attention only to the negative factors of our world instead of seeking the good. And trust me, Andrea, when I tell you there is so much of goodness in our world. This is a way to deal with the horrible things we see out there. Let's remember the phrase of Mahatma Gandhi, be the change you wish to see in the world out there. And although this seems to be, I know it seems obvious, but we still haven't caught on. So let us reflect on this very powerful phrase and be an instrument of Lord's peace.
Good thoughts, good advice, Marcelo. From Paul Jacoby: how do we get people to separate love for the person from difference on issues?
Let me see if I understood the question again. Let me read it again. Read it, say it again. How do
How
we
do
got?
we get people to separate love for a person from difference they may have on issues?
Well, it's complicated. It's not complicated. How do we get people to separate love for the person from difference of issues? We also have issues. We also have a baggage. That's why we dive into this thing called reincarnation to learn from the differences. I know it might be difficult when someone loves someone because they're doing good things to us. It's not like a best way to love. Of course, it's a step. Little by little, we're going to achieve the form of love that we all envision, to love unconditionally. And we all have issues. I know it's easy to say, Paul. I know it's easy to say, but I believe that you practice this kind of love, you will achieve at least one step, one step further to overcome the issues when you find the issues that you see in somebody else, and you will see that you also have issues. When we learn to make amends, when we learn to maybe to give less importance to the other person's issue, we will see sometimes beautiful things inside of somebody else's heart. Proclaim something different. Do this step forward. Um, be courageous to try to achieve something else within. And I'm sure if you pray fervently to the guardian angels, to the good spirits, you will achieve sometimes answers that were right in front of you. But most of the time, we didn't pay attention because everything is here, everything is there. Otherwise, Christ wouldn't be the model that we all seek to be following. I don't know if I make myself a little clear. I don't know if it makes sense for you. And well, that's what I would like to say.
It is very helpful, Marcelo, I believe. So we have another question from Kristen Santos. Marcelo, can you share some insights or suggestions on how we can get to know ourselves better? And how do we battle our fear of facing our own shadows?
This is a process. This is a process, I know. And it takes time. This process of knowing ourselves, it's something very complicated, but it's possible. I would repeat the advice that St. Augustine gave to us when we interrogate our conscience concerning the actions that we are taking every day. Let's see what we are doing in this mechanical way, but sometimes the psychological aspects of our lives indicate there's a problem that has to be addressed. But let's be the one to do this examination every day, every day. I know I was talking to too many people nowadays about anxiety, and we live in a world full of anxiety. We don't know what's going to be the next step. We see the war, we see Russia, Ukraine, we see pandemic, it's fading out. We see maybe the new variant, too many things, inflation, the government's polarity, everything invite us to be extremely anxious. Yes, in the world that we still deserve, we are going to have afflictions. Jesus said in the Gospel of John, chapter 16, verse 33, but be with faith and be courageous because he invites us to win the world, not the world outside. The world outside are always going to, not always, at the stage, in this moment of transition, we are facing all these problematic things, problems over that we see on the news, on our daily lives, on our cities, on our families. I know, but be courageous. I'm sure that if you pray, something that sometimes we take for granted, we don't pay much attention for prayer. I know we don't pay much attention, but when you pray sincerely, we open the mouth of your soul. You open your heart, better saying this way, and you will find the company of the good spirits, the benevolent spirits. They're going to approach you and to soothe your anxiety and to calm your anxious, and you will see perhaps a new door being opened. It's a step by step. Don't be the one, because when we read everything that I read, sometimes I confess, sometimes I open a book, I cry because the profound of the message is so intense, it's so beautiful, that I says, oh my God, I'm so far away from all of this objective that I want to achieve. And then I calm myself, I dive into a prayer, asking the strength to be one day the ones that give the true examples, examples of love, self confident, that there is a future, a much better future for each and every one of us. Why I am saying this? Because our Father, this is something that I repeat to myself every time that I experience this kind of anxiety and anguish and of like lack of faith in the future. My Father is the creator of this whole universe, and everything that he touches is destined to be perfect, relatively perfect. And this is just a matter of time that I have to. That's why I have to develop this courage, this inner strength, dive into a prayer, a sincere prayer, not simply repeating words, and I will find the connections that maybe been lost during the last years. That's why prayer is something that has to be an act of a human being daily, constantly, so we never lose touch with the Almighty. I'm sure if you practice these little steps, you will find uh, this bond, this connection again with all these sources of enlightening or of love, of careness, of everything that we so much anxious to be part of. Something like that.
Thank you, Marcelo. It's very comforting and encouraging uh, direction for us, that of prayer. So, from Leal Publisher, when Jesus said, "Daughter, be of good cheer, your faith has saved you. Go in peace." Jesus, and this is from Luke 8:48, chapter 8, verse 48. Do you think he meant that only by keeping the peace we would be able to maintain our health?
Let me read the question again. When Jesus said, "Daughter, be of good cheer." Now I'm reading on the chat here. Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Okay. Jesus, okay. Well, in the restoration of bodily health, your question is very valid. It's super valid. When we often forget that when we are enraged, we affect the physical body, allowing sometimes toxins to attack our very own in ways that become very clear. For example, someone whose anger ends up affecting their digestive system. Uh, our face becomes like flushed red. The spirit Andrea Lewis has. The spirit Andrea Lewis was an apprentice in the spirit world, and as a doctor, he was very amazed with the amount of information that he found out when he was in the other side of light. We're gonna see in the book Missionaries of the Light, that we are thought about the case of a woman that had a bad argument with her husband and ended up in a serious state of inner disharmony. So she had a small cloud surrounding her vital organ because of her mental state. And Andrea Lewis tells us that the permanence of such residues in her heart could cause a very dangerous illness. And there's a powerful teaching in this book that states to afflict the mind is to alter the functions of the body. This is why any inner disquiet is called disharmony, and organic disturbances are called illnesses. This is extremely empowering. I think it is. So, seeking peace is more than we think or consider. And Spiritism arrives. The promised console is Spiritism. Spiritism arrives with all these messages and teachings to help us along the way. So that's why there's a reason we have before us a world of enlightening books to guide us, to help us. If we go to, for example, Joanna de Angelis in the book Glorious Days, she tells us that when we cultivate hatred, jealousy, envy, ire, in order issues, our spirit produces physical viruses and vibrios that attack our physical bodies, and this contributes to the emergence of the emergence of toxins that invade our body. It upsets our vibrational structure, causing causing it to become sometimes ills, and sometimes working to destroy our own defenses, our immunological system sometimes are very much affected. That's why and I remember when you said, Bradley, inner peace, inner balance promotes well-being and promotes health. And well, I hope I can answer. I answered um, in a good way.
I think it's very helpful, Marcelo, because inner peace is something that we probably need to remind ourselves of quite often, each day and each evening.
That's right. That's right.
So, from the a question from the United States Spiritist Federation: how might we begin to lessen the harshness of our judgments in human law to coincide better with the peaceful path of our spiritual laws?
How might we begin to lessen the harshness of our judgment in human law to coincide better with the peaceful path of our spiritual law? Incarnation after incarnation, learning about this beautiful doctrine, these beautiful teachings. And I think more people, when more people have the knowledge that life goes on and it's not based on simply this material factor. I see too many uh, governments, political ways of analyzing life in a very material way, materialistic way. I see that more we are going to judge based on one lifetime. When we see that life goes on and we are going to be responsible for every act that we have, and we are going to, when we dive into the Jesus teachings, truly dive into Jesus teachings, not making any interpretation simply literally, we are going maybe to lessen the harshness of the way we create our laws, the way that we judge, the way that we point fingers, the way that we behave in our society. Uh, we've been much more, we've been like part of we are part of a process of building angels. And we are in this process. Some already are in a more advanced way, others are already in the less advanced ways. And we're going to see this conflict, of course. There's on Genesis, for Allan Kardec brings on chapter 18, this new generation. And this new generations are spirits with better knowledge about all these laws, laws that proclaim something way much better way of analysis, making analysis of the human being, of the spirit, the immortal spirit. And I think it's a process. Uh, but let's repeat what I mentioned during the lecture, mentioning about Mahatma Gandhi. When we want to be, let's be the change that we wish to be outside. Let's, more and more people with this knowledge are going to dive into politics, into the all social sectors of the world, and we are going to see differences. For example, 150, 200 years ago, it was very common to have a slave. It was part of our law. Now it's unacceptable for us to have a slave. We still have uh, death penalty. We still have the abortion. We still have euthanasia. We still have all these laws. All these are based in one lifetime. Even though we declare ourselves spiritualistic Christians, uh, uh, we make this interpretation based in one lifetime. We're still based on, for example, hell and heaven. We still like we're putting like a barrier, those that is going to be condemned for the rest of their lives, and those who will experience the bliss of the heavens. But we forget that God is a loving Father, that it's having us insert in this moment of humanity to learn with our mistakes, and sometimes subject to our mistakes, because we were in the past the ones that promote the same mistakes. And because of the law of cause and effect, we are subject to this kinds of laws, so we can learn very harsh, very deeply, if we are wise men, not to do the same. Little by little, Bradley, we are changing. We see improvement. 2,000 years ago, were very common to get Christians in the middle of a circus and throw the lions to devour them. Now it's unacceptable. See, the harshness of the laws are going, but it takes time. See how we are hard-headed? It takes times, but we will achieve this. But it's up to us to be the one that promotes this transformation within. And once we transform ourselves without the harshness, without the hardening that we still have inside of ourselves, we're going to be inserted in many sectors of society, and we will change the paradigm to one lifetime, to this more adjusted paradigm to what Christ brought us 2,000 years ago.
Good thoughts. It is a very challenging, maybe slow path to achieve this, but I think it is a good thought you have had presented us with seeking our better selves, and also seeking the better part of others rather than seeing the negative. So, from another question from the United States Spiritist Federation: is there a practical way to develop peace within?
This is, in my opinion, a question that could lead to many different answers, but in summarizing, apply the golden rule. This rule guides people to choose for others what they would choose for themselves. The golden rule is often described as putting yourself in someone else's shoes, or do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Another way is to try and consider the meaning of that new commandment left by Christ, which is found in the Gospel of John. A new command I give you: love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. So, studying the Beatitudes is also a precious idea, for we will offers us the guidelines for true peace that we all seek. If I am afflicted, I may not be in peace. But if I understand the reason for affliction, I may be able to pacify the torment within. If I am in mourning and I read, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted, And we know Spiritism to be the promised consoler, symbolically speaking, Christ returning to our side. Our inner world will reflect this knowledge of true understanding of what this consolation entails.
Thank you. So, um, and from Paula Craig, thank you. A lot to think about and discover in our lives. And Jose Marcos Trad, Marcelo, it's always a joy to hear from you. His words are full of truth because they came from the heart.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you from Paul Jacoby. Thank you, Marcelo, for a wonderful presentation and very informative answer to my question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Uh, Again, thank you very much, Marcelo. All of us, we thank you for being here today, and much appreciation to everyone who joined us today for today's Spiritist Talk Live, and those who have been following our weekly Spiritist Talk series. Before we close our live today, I would like to remind everyone of the United States Spiritist Federation virtual course, Initiation into Spiritism, which is provided free of charge on Sundays at 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And Marcelo will speak on the Lord's Prayer. So I believe it will be a very insightful and engaging uh, presentation to be a part of. This course is a self-paced course, so uh, it will provide you the opportunity to learn and review the basic principles of Spiritism. So please avail yourself of this opportunity by visiting the course page on the United States Spiritist Federation website to receive reminders by email. This next Saturday, we will have in the Spiritist Talk series a presentation by Roberto Watanabe on free will. I think it will be fantastic, as all of them have been, and we certainly look forward to it. Marcelo, before we close live today, would you please do us the honor of offering a prayer?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's all pray. Let's all pray in this moment that we so much need the peace within. So one day we can be the ones that really and truly promote peace. That's why, dear Lord, we ask you your presence in our daily lives. Help us to overcome the obstacles that still resides inside of each and every one of us, transforming the inner, the inside, the our spirit. It's not going to be a magical thing. I know that needs to be the strength and the will from my part. But I know without you it will be impossible to walk through this road, walk through this process of looking for the light that's still and always be waiting for each and every one of us. Our shadows, our darkness that still resides inside of us will be clarified, will be dismissed, will be something else transmutated to something much more lighter, much more brighter, much more loving. If I can repeat the words of St. Francis of Assisi. Help us to be an instrument of your peace, dear Lord. Help us to be someone to transform the world. Where there is hatred, help us to sow love. Where there is injury, help us to be the one that promote the pardon. Where there is error, the truth, the doubt, faith, despair, help us to be the one that promotes hope. Where there's darkness in this world full of darkness, help us to show the light that always been available to each and every one of us. Sadness, let's be the one to bring joy. Oh, Divine Master, help us to be the one to console more, much more than wishing to be consoled, to be the one that understands our dear brothers and sisters much more than we wish to be understood. In fact, dear Lord, help us to be the one who love much more than we wish to be loved, because we understand that this is just a fraction of time in the watch of eternity, in this clock of eternity. And one day, this light will shine not only outside, but within our hearts. And we are going to sing out loud with joy in our hearts. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord, because I am someone that overcame all the obstacles that once reside inside of my heart. And I'm going to be a true instrument of your peace. Thank you so much. And so be it.
Hmm. And so be it. Thank you, and may all of you have a calming and mindful weekend. And thank you for joining us today.